Hello, everyone. Welcome today. We're super excited that you've taken some time to learn with us today, to be a part of this conversation. We do these every month, and I know some of you come back, month after month to be a part of this. So we really appreciate the support and you taking the time out of your day to hang out with us for a bit. So we'll go ahead and get the slideshow going, and then we'll work towards getting the robust conversation going about CMMC. The goals today are going to be to discuss some of the upcoming aspects of CMMC and some of the changes that have happened, and provide a bit of an update on that, and then also work towards having a conversation about how 360 Advanced could be able to help your company prepare for CMMC. So that's going to be towards the end, and we'll have a lot of robust dialogue and conversation along the way. So Eric, you're going to provide the slideshow. Is that I think we might be having some technical difficulties on the slideshow, and if that's happening, that's totally cool. We can roll with that. And so what I'd like to do is I'll go ahead and introduce our firm, and then we'll introduce the guests that are with us, and then we'll see we'll get the slideshow going here shortly. Yes, we're in mid-flight. We're getting there, guys. The slideshow's coming. So anyway, so 360 Advanced. A lot of you have heard this before, but I'll tell you, I'll share this with folks who this might be your first time. So we are an audit and compliance firm located, headquartered here in St. Petersburg, Florida, outside of Tampa. Have about 100 people or so in our firm, and are really we're a privately, we're a privately held firm, and so what that does is that allows for us to then have nuanced and detailed conversations and really focus on building relationships with our clients. And we've been in business for about 15 years or so, and the services that we end up helping folks with or businesses with are SOC 2, ISO 27001, PCI, high trust, penetration testing, and a litany of risk assessments. And one of the other services that we offer is a managed compliance service called 360 Cyber Comply. And that's kind of in the context of how we're going to frame how we may be able to help your company with getting ready for CMMC. So that's kind of what we've thought we would have that conversation around today. And so let's just kind of go ahead and get things fired off. Do you want to, Eric, can you show the agenda? That kind of help us keep right on. Actually, go up front, go back a slide. We're all realizing that we're off track here a little bit. That's all good. That's fine. We'll do some introductions. We know our services. Let's go to our people. All right. Boom. We're here, guys. We're back. Let's stay focused. And so let's go ahead. I'm going to introduce the team that's with us today. And we'll start on the left with Michael Dempsey, and then we'll work through the 360 Advanced team. And let's just let everyone provide a little bit of insight on who they are and their experience, and then we'll get things going. So Michael, thank you for joining us as our guest, by the way. And so we'll let you kick things off. Just kind of share a little bit about yourself and your experience.
Okay. Hey, everybody. And thank you, 360, for having me here. I've been in this field for a very long time, more than I want to say. I go back to DITSCAP days with DoD, so everyone knows that's early 2000s. So I've been doing this for quite a while. I am a certified assessor. I'm one of the first ones. I like to brag I'm number 11, so that's going to be cool in like 4 years when there's 5,000 of us. CISIV is also an authorized C3PO, my company. We were the 10th one, so we've been around pretty much since the beginning of CMMC 1 and 2 and whatever it becomes. So hopefully I have enough answers for you, and I will preface everything with we'll see is going to be said a lot, and it depends will be said a lot today. But hopefully we can answer a lot of your questions. So
Thanks, Michael. And go ahead, Brad.
Sure. My name is Brad Lyons. I'm a Senior Practice Director with 360 Advanced. I've been in the cybersecurity and audit compliance game since 2003. I've been with 360 Advanced since 2011, and all of the standards that Carlos mentioned and a lot more, I've had the privilege to either execute or oversee over the many years. And now Dave and I are starting up a advisory function within our firm under the cyber comply business model. So we're excited to have Michael here today. Thank you for joining us, and we're looking forward to the conversation and talking a little bit about how cyber comply can help your organization potentially move forward in your CMMC journey.
Excellent. Dave, you want to go next since you're on the slide next?
Yeah, that sounds good. Brad, thanks for the intro. It's going to be a tough one to follow. But yeah, Dave Rosa here, excited to participate in this conversation. I've been with 360 a little less than a year now. Prior to that, spent almost 12 years at PricewaterhouseCoopers within the cybersecurity advisory, risk and regulatory practice. And as Brad had alluded to, we are working to start or have started and looking to expand upon our managed compliance services under the title of 360 Cyber Comply. So I'm excited to bring this new CMMC requirement into our purview, and again, looking forward to the good conversation.
Excellent. And go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Chris Francis. I'm on the 360 Advanced team. My official title is Senior Compliance Executive. However, my duties day to day are helping clients, educating them in our services, helping them build a strategy towards attaining the goals of whatever compliance service that they're working on. I've been with the firm about 10 years. I'll say that I've grown up here. I was in a different industry and came here and have been here ever since. So, you know, my breadth of knowledge expands from SOC, PCI, HIPAA, ISO, HITRUST, NIST, FISMA, FedRAMP, CMMC, of course, our new 360 Cyber Comply. So truthfully, you know, clients work with me to help define their path forward in attaining different compliance attestations and certifications.
Perfect. And my name is Carlos Guerrero, and I'll be guiding us along through this conversation for the rest of the hour. So let's go ahead and go to and take a look at the agenda. We're going to do a couple quick polls. And so we're going to ask for a little bit of your interaction out of the gate. There's going to be 4 of them, and we'll give you about 30 seconds or so to answer those. And then we have a slide at the very end where we'll review those answers and use that as a discussion point. But these polls should be a way just to kind of get get yourself thinking about this topic. We'll go over a little bit of the history. All right. So we can go ahead and start the polls. Let's do that now. So what CMMC level is your business? And then you can take just a little, take 30 seconds or so, and then we'll go to the next one. All right, that should be enough time, Eric. The next one, what should be your first step in your CMMC journey? We have identify your CUI and where it resides, engage with a C3PAO or advisory firm, or define your security boundary. All right, I think you can go on to the next one. All right, you must meet all requirements within your respective level to become CMMC certified, true or false. That shouldn't take a whole lot of time. We'll give you a couple seconds there, and then Eric, you can move on to the next one. All right, an SSP requires an implementation statement of a healthy level of supporting documentation around higher requirements or applicable. Please, true or false? And then as soon as that one's done, we'll move right on into the content. So we're back to our agenda now. So we did our polls. Thank you guys for participating. We'll review those answers towards the end. So what we're going to do today is we're going to discuss a little bit about the history of CMMC. We're going to talk a little bit about the False Claims Act and why that might be relevant. We'll review a few terms, acronyms, and some public resources. We'll hammer on those a little bit, but the objective of that really is for you to have that when you get the recording and also the deck. And then we'll spend a considerable amount of time talking about the CMMC 2.0 levels, and then the relationship between NIST 171 and CMMC, and then we'll talk a little bit about Rev 3, and then we'll talk a little bit about what to consider when building a program, especially if you haven't gotten one kicked off. And please know that this is going to be an open dialogue throughout, and so we may be answering some questions that we get in from the audience along the way. So please make sure to put some things in the chat if you'd like for us to answer those questions. And then also, a lot of you probably should have received an email asking for questions yesterday, and so we got some of those, and those are compiled, and we'll review those as well. So let's go ahead and go a little bit to the history of CMMC. So I think that the gist of this is we want to portray that CMMC, although is really coming into focus, that there's really a historical timeline of the program itself and where this began. And so Michael, I was going to hand this off to you and just kind of let you start with where this really did start coming into focus and what folks should really think about when it comes to the history and the timeline.
Okay, thanks. It's good to understand the past a little bit, right? You got to know where everything came from. And in this timeline, obviously it's a summary of it, but from 2002 through 2015, that's when the laws and regulations kind of came into play, right? So we had the Homeland Security Act, the memorandums, executive orders, all of those came out. And then in 2015, NIST 171 was released. And then in 2016, this is really where it all started. DFA's 7012 clause was put into people's contracts, which required them to maintain a basic level of security. And then they would have to self-attest to that in the beginning. You had to implement 171 because DFA 7012 tells you to. And then you had to attest to that each year, right? So you go into SPURS and say, here's my score. I have a 100, a 110. And that seemed to work good at the beginning. From 2016 till now, till 2 years ago, DIBCAC was doing assessments. So they would go out and randomly select companies and do their DIBCAC high assessments, they're called, which would be an assessment of 171. And basically what they found was people were reporting 100 to 110, and almost 80 or 90% of the companies they tested were below zero, right? So they didn't even make it to zero. So they started realizing that there was an issue with the self-reporting. People were just kind of saying, hey, we did this, we're doing it, so they could get a contract. So that's how CMMC came about. They realized that. So then in 2019, they kind of came up with the whole CMMC. What are we going to do? So CMMC becomes the validation of 7012. And we'll get into this a little bit later too. So 7012 is what requires you right now to implement NIST 171. So in 2020, the version 1 came out. That didn't go over too good. Lasted about a year. Version 2 came out, which is where we're at now, and which is what should be coming out when the rule comes out next year, is the standard that we'll be using, which again, CMMC tells us that we can do the assessments and you have to be evaluated because the scores weren't accurate. So that's what CMMC is. And I think we have a slide later on that we'll talk about the NIST and whatnot. So CMMC is just to make sure that you're doing the rule and the law that went into place in 2016. So it's been 7 years and now we're just starting to validate it. And right now where we sit pending is the rule. So as a lot of people here is DOD has developed the rule. It has to go out to small business, comes back with their comments, they get fixed. Then it goes over to OMB at the high level and they evaluate it to decide whether changes have to be made. That comes back. So there's a whole federal process behind that rulemaking. And one of the rules is DOD can't talk about it. So now that it's in rulemaking in that final stage of submission, the DOD will not give us any updates on that. So we all literally in the spot where we have to hold to find out what that final rule is going to be. So what we know today is what we know.
Yeah.
So that's a brief history.
Yeah.
Keeping it.
And Carlos, I don't mean to overstep here, but I think it's important as we get into this conversation, Michael, if you could help people understand the difference from FedRAMP certification and what CMMC certification is trying to accomplish.
Okay, so FedRAMP is, from the federal side, a certification of cloud service providers. So most federal agencies have to follow FISMA, and they do 853, with 171 being a subset of 853. So these federal agencies had to do 853, but they were using the cloud, and these providers didn't want to have to participate in every assessment for every single customer. So they developed FedRAMP so they could be assessed once, and any agency in the government can use that, right? So Microsoft has a FedRAMP, applications and things. I think there's about 400 approved FedRAMP applications or services. And that's just so that the government agencies can just accept that. They inherit those controls. Whereas in CMMC, ultimately, we hope they will be able to do the same thing. However, right now, that's not in the rule, right? We're waiting for the rule to tell us that. So FedRAMP is a certification for cloud service providers from the federal side of things. On DoD, CMMC is part of the DoD environment, and that reciprocity hasn't been decided yet. So again, we'll have to wait and see. As I said, we're going to say that a few times today.
No, I appreciate that, and I feel like that's a really important thing to, when you're getting your mindset to understand CMMC, to understand that they are different, and currently there's no reciprocity. So even if you are FedRAMP certified today, you will still need a CMMC program in order to play ball with the DoD.
Yep. No, that makes a lot of sense, Chris. And I think, one of the things that we've been, speaking about internally is, sort of a public perception thing, right? Like a lot of companies, that they feel like they want to wait until, to the rulemaking, like Michael said. But I think this timeline shows that, the necessity to align with NIST has been around for a long time. And so I think that's one of the things that we want to encourage people today to start thinking about as we start walking through this conversation. So I think, in drawing that comparison between FedRAMP also makes a lot of sense. Why don't we go ahead and head to the next slide? Yes, the False Claims Act. So this is something that's been around for a while, but Michael, I've heard that that there's actually some companies, or they're putting people on notice to some degree, right? I mean, what's happening, and why should people at least be aware that the False Claims Act is a thing? And let me put this out here too. Like we typically do not like to fearmonger or put any FUD out there, but I think that it's important to know that there is a stick. There is something for folks to at least be understanding that it's out there. So Michael, do you want to kind of help us bring that into focus a little bit?
Sure. Consequences. False Claims Act is the consequence for not implementing 171. I mean, it comes down. The slide is simple because that's literally what this is. This is the stick, as Carlos said, for them to get you, so to speak. If you knowingly submit a false statement to the government under a contract, they can take you to court, so you lose your contract, lose your ability to continue to win contracts, to even bid on contracts. So making the statement in Spurs saying, I have a score of 110, when you know you don't have a score of 110, is a false claims on your part, and the government can come after you. They're slowly ramping that up. I think in the last year, there's been 2. So they've had their contract pulled, and they've had to pay some of it back. I can't remember the numbers. I want to say it's in the hundreds of thousands with this. So they're going to start, what you're going to see is the government is going to use this on select people to show the industry that we have this and we are willing to use it. But it applies to anyone. So if you got a 110, you said 110 and DIPCAT came out and found out you were a minus 150, they have the opening to use this against you.
Brad, I know you've been working a long time in compliance, and certainly spent a lot of time with HIPAA. I think like it kind of reminds me like in the old days when HIPAA became a thing, right? There was this sort of fuzziness around what it was, and it sort of came into focus over time. I mean, you've seen these things like as trends in the industry. I mean, this isn't necessarily new, is it?
No, this is actually the standard life cycle, especially with government, right? It just takes longer than what everybody thinks that, but this is how they do it. They start out, hey, here's the rules, everybody kind of adopt them, and then, hey, self-attest, and then, hey, we're going to start really looking at you, and then, hey, everybody really better have their stuff together. So when we were thinking up the idea to have this webinar today, I think what we all agreed to is now's a good time if you haven't really started your journey and really looking at, are you doing things the right way? Are you really documenting these things to support if you were to get audited? Could you turn over the documentation that would be necessary to support your scores and really help you stay on the safe side of everything? Now is the time to think about it, right? Because it's coming, and it can be pretty bad if you're not there, right, Michael?
That's right, 3 times the damages, just like it says. So if your contract's 100,000, they could hit you for 300,000 and ban you from bidding on contracts.
Good information for folks to know. Okay, let's roll through and go through some of these next slides. We probably won't spend a ton of time on these next ones, but we definitely want to cover a few things. So, the government, of course, there's tons of acronyms, and it's no different with CMMC. So we just wanted to spell out a few of them, and maybe even have a conversation around a couple of them. And I took notes and thought that it might be worth mentioning CUI. Like, what is CUI? I mean, and why should people be concerned about that? And Brad, you can take that one, I think, again.
Yeah, I'll do my best. And Michael, please correct me if I'm wrong in anything, but if you have information that the government has not classified but has determined is CUI, you are required to be at a level 2, is the way I understand it. And these are a term that you're going to hear a lot. You need to go through your system and really identify where your CUI lies within your system, and then try and figure out, okay, how do I create a compliant environment as it pertains to all the requirements that are relevant to you? So, Michael, I hope I got that all fairly correct.
Yep. So that's a great short version, and I'm sure you will find lots of webinars and things that take 1 or 2 hours to just discuss CUI's topic. We're keeping it simple here. So NARA CUI registry and the DoD CUI registry are the 2 resources for that. To help you identify it. It's complex. You most likely will need someone to help you review it.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think the C3PAO, I mean, Michael, you are one, and like you mentioned, you're one of the earliest ones. I mean, you want to kind of explain like what that entails and kind of that journey, not the journey necessarily, but like how there's only a few and how there needs to be more, and maybe why that's even an important thing to be discussing.
Yeah, so the 2 biggest things in the ecosystem are CCAs and C3PAOs. So the C3PAOs are the organization that will be conducting the certification. So when you're assessed, the C3PAO will be issuing your certification, not DoD, not Cyber AB, but the C3PAOs. So they're the final line. They make the determination. Everything comes back to them. There's 44 of us right now. I think there's 20 over the last year. So it's kind of a slow process. Why? Because we have to have the same secure environment that the OSCs have to have. A little bit more because we have the collection of everybody's, all OSCs that we perform assessments for, we have their data. So they're a little bit harder on us when they do their assessment. So we have the same environment. We go through the same assessment that the OSCs will. So all C3POs completely understand the process. So when they say we understand, we do. JIBCAT comes out to us and beats us up for a week to certify us. And then the AB authorizes us to do the authorization. So we need more, and it's growing. The CCAs who will work for the C3PAOs, those are the folks who will actually come out into your environment. So like ISO, you have the lead auditors, they're designated. So these certified assessors have been trained to go out and evaluate these organizations and make the determination that you should be or should not be certified, which then goes to the C3PO who then authorizes you. Right now there are, I'm estimating official CCAs is probably about 50. And by official, I mean that they've passed their exam, they took their training, they passed their exam, they've passed their suitability background checks, and they've conducted their 3 assessments. So those are the requirements of CCAs. There's about 50 of them, and those were the provisional assessors, right? So the original provisional assessors became CCAs. There's lots of folks who have gone through the training and taken the exam, but they haven't done their assessments. The 3 assessments they have to participate in to get fully certified as an assessor. So both of those things are bottlenecks right now. You know?
No, perfect. It's good for people to know because it is important, right? Because folks are already getting in queue. Let's go to the next slide. We have a couple more acronyms, and then we'll come over to the these public resources. These will all come out to you. These links are something you can look at. What I found valuable, and I would like for everyone to go to this if you haven't, like the Cyber AB, that accreditation body that Michael was talking about. They have a lot. They do these town halls every month, and if you want information on updates on what's happening with CMMC, I think that's a great resource, and I recommend you all checking that out. Let's go ahead.
Real quick. On those town halls, they're all on the Cyber AB's website. They have all the previous town halls recorded, so you can actually go back and view any session they had.
Yeah.
And to further draw a line between CMMC and FedRAMP, Michael, can a 3PAO perform CMMC certifications?
So a 3PAO cannot. They're only authorized to do FedRAMP assessments. And the C3PAOs for CMMC 3PAO are the only ones doing CMMC assessments.
Perfect. I'm just trying to draw a clear line for individuals in the audience that may have FedRAMP and want to utilize that same assessor, see if they're credentialed, that sort of thing. Appreciate that. Thank you.
No, that's perfect. Let's spend some time talking a little bit about the levels, and then I have a couple questions from the audience that I'd like to see if we can answer. Michael, why don't you walk us through the levels at a high level, but at least give people a bit of an understanding of where they might place themselves and why it's important to find that place for themselves.
Yeah. So level 1 is the foundational. So this is that you're using basic security safeguards to protect data. This is for FCI, Federal Contract Information. It has 15 requirements that match 171. They're not pulled from 171. They're pulled from the D5 7012 that has specific requirements. This is a standard for everyone. If you've identified that you have CUI, you then move up to level 2. So level 2 has the 110 requirements, which are the controls for 171. For level 2, you'll be assessed by a C3PAO and certified, and that will be good for 3 years. The second year and the third year in between, you have to self-attest, and they change it up a little bit. You now have to have a senior executive of the company self-attest in SPURS that this is your actual score and that you're maintaining your certification. Level 3, there's not much talk about that. Obviously, level 2 is the biggest one, the majority of folks. From what I've been told over the last year and a half, they're only looking at a small number of companies requiring level 3, and DoD will determine who those folks are. What level 3 will be is it'll be the 110 controls and then some number of additional controls from 172 and possibly even specific DoD requirements for that. The way that would work is that company, if they're identified as a level 3, they would have to get a C3PAO to certify them at level 2, and then DIPCAC will come in and assess whatever above level 2 they've identified to make you level 3. So you still need the C3PAO, even though DIPCAC does the assessment, is what, kind of the talk out there is, oh, they'll do it. But what they do is the difference above level 2. You still need a C3PAO to do that. Is that brief enough?
No, that's perfect. I think it's a great explanation.
Carlos, just one question on these levels that I think would be valuable to the audience. Michael, do any of these levels require any form of penetration testing? I know that FedRAMP does, and it would make sense for CMMC too as well, but formally, is that part of the program today?
It is not. So penetration testing is not one of the controls within 171. conducting a vulnerability scan is. So you do have to do vulnerability scanning internally, but a penetration test is not required. It's good practice, and you should, right? So I'm trying to wear my cybersecurity hat and my assessor hat. So
security
hat says, please do it. You know, my assessor hat says you're not required to.
And again, for clarity, if I have Nessus internally and I run those scans, I'm meeting the requirement.
That is correct.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
That's good to know. I just got a question. I think that would be a good time to bring that in. As from TJ, he asked, how do you determine which controls are actually in scope? Is that something that you could maybe shed some light on, Michael?
Yep. So all 110 controls for level 2 are in scope. What happens is you have to evaluate the assets within your environment. So the CMMC scoping guide helps you identify the assets. So your asset is CUI. If it contains CUI, it holds it or processes it. It can be a security protection asset, so something that helps protect it, your antivirus server, a SIEM, a log files, things like that. Third, there's a contract risk managed asset. So this is something that can access the CUI, but isn't authorized to. And then there's, what is it? OT devices, I'm sorry, and then out of scope devices. So you have to identify what assets in your environment touch the CUI, process the CUI, can access it, but it's not supposed to. And then you identify those. And then you can apply the controls to each of those asset categories. Because they won't all apply to CRM, or they won't all apply to the SIEM, just management, things like that. So it sounds complicated, and it is, right? So the CUI question is difficult, identifying your CUI, and then identifying the assets that access, control, secure it is a difficult process. What do I call it, right? If it's a CUI asset, all 110 have to apply to that device. CRM, you might be able to get it down to 20 or 30, you know, depending on that service. So it's definitely a complicated question.
Michael, could you explain a triennial third-party assessment versus annual affirmation?
Okay, I'll jump back. So the C3POs will conduct an assessment and certify you. And that's good for 3 years. After 3 years, the C3PO has to come back out and recertify you. So the same full assessment, nothing in between. The annual affirmation was the senior executive has to go to Spurs and attest that it's still in place and that nothing has changed.
Excellent.
Is that senior executive of the organization who is CMMC certified, or is that from the third-party assessment firm?
No, from the OSC, so from the organization that was certified.
Oh, perfect. Thank you for that clarity.
I just got another question. Someone asked, like, how do we, they say we, like, how do we you know, we believe this applies to us, but how do we determine which level we're at? We said that level 3 is they would know, but how do they determine if they're level 1 or level 2 to begin with?
So if you only have FCI, Federal Contract Information, then you're a level 1. If you have CUI, so documents information, technical information that is labeled or identified as CUI, which DoD should do, and then your contractor should be telling you that it's CUI, or the COI should be explaining to you that it is, that makes you level 2. So just having the possession or access to the CUI will cause you to be level 2.
So it's pretty easy to figure out, right? I mean, if you know, if you're paying attention, essentially, you should know if you have CUI. But I guess there is, like you said, there's whole webinars out there on, you know, how to define what CUI is, just to sort of make sure there's some, you know, some lines in the sand there. But in general, that's something that really folks should be paying attention to.
Yep. Always ask. The COI has to tell you if it is or it isn't. As we all know, though, DoD is not good at labeling it themselves. So if you feel that something is CUI, immediately ask, maybe not accept it until you're clear that it is or isn't CUI. But if you have something that you think it is, at least protect it until you can confirm it. Right? You're level 2 if you have any type of CUI. That's the simple line.
Makes complete sense. All right, we can go on to the next slide. Okay, let's let's talk a little bit about this. And this is, we kind of brought this up early on, but I think as we kind of have this conversation and talking about building a program, I think it's important to bring this back, into focus. The relationship between CMMC and this, especially 800 171. Michael, we've been talking about this collectively, and I mean, I think it's understood that the NIST 171 has people have or businesses doing business and have CUI should have been aligning with this for a long time, and CMMC is really going to be validating that standard. I mean, is that the best way to put it, or maybe you could shine some light on that?
So again, keeping it simple, the bottom two lines on this slide are exactly what you just said. So NIST 171 is the standard that you have to implement. Right? So it's D5 7012 requires you to follow NIST 171 and implement those controls. CMMC is only the validation of that implementation. So when as a C3PO or an assessor, I come out, I'm taking 171 and asking you how you've implemented that and to demonstrate that you've implemented that. And that's all CMMC is the validation of that implementation, which started back in 2016. Perfect. So as I said earlier, from 2016 to 2020, DIVCAC found that a lot of the scores weren't matching up and that we needed some way to validate it. And DIVCAC didn't have the resources or the people. So they they came up with CMMC as a way to validate the implementation of 171. So when CMMC comes out, if recently you've had D5's clause 7019 come out that says DIVCAC can assess you, 7020 that says, 7019 that says you have to report it, 7020 says DIVCAC can come out and assess you, which then trickles to the C3POs that we can come out. And then what's not out is the D5's clause 7021, which will be the rule that we're waiting for that says C3PAOs will be conducting independent assessments of the organization. So hopefully
that's perfect, and I think that's what we want to frame up for folks, and we're going to sort of focus on that NIST 800 171. And Dave, I had a question for you. So if an organization if they haven't implemented 171, right? Like what does that timeline look like? And what does even getting started look like in terms of getting a program like that off the ground? I think it would be important for people to understand the breadth of that.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of requirements that go into that, as alluded to by Michael. 171 is 110 controls or requirements that is going to require a lot of work. There's a lot of technicalities that go into all that, including the documentation related to system security plan, and all that is just something that takes a good amount of time for an organization that's starting from scratch, or even starting with other compliance requirements, even a SOC 2 or a high trust, or some of the other applicable, more common frameworks and compliance requirements out there don't get organizations as far along as they think it would. So just getting started right away, understanding what those 110 controls are, understanding what goes into a system security plan, commonly referred to as an SSP, what goes into those is just the starting point. There's a long runway to get from starting the conversation and getting all the way to a C3PO certifying an organization. So starting early is vital.
Yeah, Carlos, I'll add on that too. The general life cycle for any standard that you're trying to achieve usually is engaging with a professional, right, to help you. There's a lot of steps that need to happen before you even dive into the requirements, figuring out where your data is, drawing that line, identifying all those systems that tie in, really manage and oversee the security around those systems. And then working to go through and do a readiness assessment and determine what you have in place, what's partially in place, what needs to be in place. From there, you've got to implement and put in some remediation work, document, like Dave was explaining. The SSP is system security plan, which outlines how each requirement is applicable to you and how it's being addressed. Alongside, you need to have policies and procedures around all these things. So there is a lot of documentation to get through, and then generally you can move, if you feel like you're ready, you can move straight to an assessment, or you could have another mock assessment or something ahead of time just to gain that assurance that everything is there. So there's quite a few steps, Carlos, and most standards of the size of level 2, where you're looking at 110 requirements, a good plan would include roughly 12 months to try to achieve something like this if you don't have a ton of manpower, because even with hiring a firm like 360 Advanced or anybody out there, it's going to take some level of effort from your side too to really do some of these things. Even if you hire somebody who's going to put pen to paper and really help you, they're going to need your expertise as to how the company's run, and there may need to be some changes that are made that can't be accepted overnight, depending on complexities of the organization, age, size, all those things factor in. So there's quite a bit to do.
I think that's the message we certainly want to get out there, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail about just building a program and what our program looks like to help companies do that in the slide after next. But let's go ahead and shoot on back to Rev 3. So I think that there's a lot in the press right now. NIST is coming out with a Rev 3 for 171, and it's something that folks should be paying attention to because it's there, Michael. And again, there's a lot of press around that. Like, how is that going to relate to CMMC?
So in the short term, there won't be much effect. It's a very specific version, and generally the rules will say 171, right? So you need to implement NIST 800-171 current version at the time of award is what's expected to be said. However, there's usually a break-in period. So as an example, 853, the father of 171, went from Rev 4 to Rev 5 years ago, and folks are still trying to implement that in the federal government because it was such a big change. So I even if 171 comes out in January, February on their fast track, it's hard to see how that's going to be a requirement right away for CMMC, because most folks aren't going to know about it, and it could take, like Brad said, it could take you 12 months to readjust and refine tune everything to the differences in that revision. So real quick on that, so Rev 2 had 14 families, and Rev 3 now has 17. Right, so the controls and objectives in Rev 2, which we know 320 objectives you had to answer, have been combined, moved, or removed from Rev 3, but you still have 110 controls, right? So that alone should explain the complexity within Rev 3, going from Rev 2 to Rev 3. How many objectives we'll be assessing in Rev 3 is unknown, because they haven't even created the 171 Alpha A assessment guide for that. So again, even if they come out with that in January, it's going to take at least a year or so before things start transitioning and companies have to get done. And that's all based on history, right? So, past performance is no indication of future performance. But, that generally that's how it works in the government on these version changes. So it's good to know they will be coming. So ultimately in a year, a year and a half, 2 years, you'll have to be going to that, and you'll be assessed against that. And you should be looking forward to it, because it's just different, right? Things are in different places. They've increased a little bit of the flexibility in it. So like the last one, organizationally defined items, right? So this is, review your audit logs at an organizationally defined time period, right? So that's what that ODP means. And they've added a lot more in that. However, it generated more confusion, because who's going to tell them that, right?
Exactly.
Company A could say 12 months, someone else could say 3 months, and neither one would be wrong. So it's good and it's bad, and this is why it wouldn't be required immediately. It's going to come out. There's going to be issues, and it's going to take a year or more to work.
That makes complete sense. And I think when you said looking forward to, I think you meant be prepared for. I don't know if anybody's
prepared for. Yes.
looking forward to it. Well, let's head on to the next slide, and then I think there's no image here, is there? Come on, image. There we go. So this is kind of where we sort of bring all of this to a head. I mean, the way that the assessing works is you would work with a firm like Michael's, who is the 3PAO to do the certification. And the way that it works is that you have to have a different company, like one like 360 Advanced, to come to help you, get ready for that, or that's typically what's advised. And a lot of times a company might do that through some sort of gap assessment. But what we've done is we've built that into an overall program that is what we're calling managed compliance. And so, so Brad, you've been a big architect of this program. Do you want to speak a little bit to
Sure.
like what this is and how it might be helpful to an organization, especially that doesn't have the resources to get ready for someone like Michael to come in?
Yeah, I'll give a quick overview, Carlos. I know we're in the last 15 minutes here, and if anybody has questions about Cyber Comply, please reach out to Carlos or anybody on our team, and we'd love to schedule some time, tell you more about it. So what we've realized over the years is that as the world gets more complex, as standards get larger, as organizations have to adhere to so many different things and have so many business partners because they outsource functions, everything's gotten so complex and streamlined that compliance for small and mid-sized companies is really an afterthought, right? It's not something that's being strategically thought about, but it really should be. And it's not being managed by anybody within the direct payroll or team. So what we're trying to do for the small and mid-sized companies is really be that function from executive all the way down to staff and help them build programs like a CMMC environment or HIPAA or SOC 2 or whatever it is, but also do all the things around it that it's there for, right? Compliance isn't there just to be compliance. It's there to help make you a better business and really make sure you're doing the things that are critical to the organization. So with our many years of experience and all the different standards, what we try to do is really apply practical solutions and controls and help organizations identify the efficient way through compliance while doing the right thing. So this is a subscription model that we've come up with basically, and the way we do it is we have a series of scoping calls to really customize a plan and approach for the year, understand the organization's ability and budget constraints that they may have and time that they may be able to give us. And then we come up with a plan to execute, and we contract and have gain and understanding call, get our arms around the organization. We can do many different things. It really just depends. We can go through a couple examples, but we are their ad hoc counsel for compliance, strategic thought, vision, road mapping out a couple of years of things that are on horizon, and really helping consult on what's a good ROI, what's not, as well as the many different things. On the other end of the spectrum, we also have the larger entities that we're doing work for, and most of them have a compliance function within house. And so what we try to do there is support that team, make sure that they're making sound decisions, strategic thought, but really be an extension of their team, right? And support them, allow them to scale up and scale down as needed and very quickly. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there, Carlos.
I think that's a good spot to leave it. And Dave, I was going to mention that in terms of the ability to sort of be that outsourced counsel. I mean, kind of explain how that would work in the context of CMMC, especially since we don't know like what rulemaking is going to look like. We know that end target is still a little bit fuzzy. Like how could they leverage our services to keep their eye on that ball?
Yeah, well, to expand upon what Brad mentioned earlier, really one of the main components of a managed service is giving you the intelligence and the knowledge to know what's applicable now, what's in the forefront, what's coming, what are those changes. We have a team that's monitoring this stuff every day and making sure that we know what's coming down the pipeline, what's going to impact organizations, and the things that need to be done in preparation of all these requirements, whether it be compliance, regulatory, legal, and just making sure we have a plan, right? There's a lot of things that need to happen in the beginning phases of all this, and coming with a plan and being able to execute upon it is one of the most important things. So just staying aware, making sure you have the intelligence coming into your organization and understand what those implications are, I think are a really, really big part of that.
Great point. And Michael, I guess before we go to the last slide and look at those poll questions, I mean, you've before we go to look at the poll questions, we would then, Michael, like how do working with understanding like your position in the marketplace and understanding ours, how do those relationships best work? I mean, from your experience and for the client, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, from the client perspective, having someone help them organize. I mean, as we've gone through identifying your COI, what levels, what applies, what asset types, there's a lot to it before you even get to what your environment looks like, right? So they need that guidance, because at the end, when I come in as a C3PAO, we're going to look for you to tell us what you're doing, and then have the supporting documents, right? So the supporting documents are important because you can't put everything in the SSP, right? Nobody wants a 2,000-page SSP. So you document what you're doing in there and say, okay, here's my procedures. So you have to have a procedure document. You have to have a policy document. You have to have step-by-step procedures that tell you all these things. Have your certificates for encryption type of thing. So as a C3PO, it's really beneficial to the OSC to have all this organized and in place. And working with companies like 360, you can help them organize it properly. If it's very difficult for an assessor to follow your documents, you're going to have a very difficult assessment, right? If we get simple things are questioned, then it asks more questions and asks more questions. If we can follow and understand your documentation, how you're set up, it makes it easier on you as the assessee.
Makes complete sense. It's really a fair way to put it. So let's go to the last slide. Let's take a look at some of these answers to these poll questions and use these for just some last points of discussion before we take off. Hopefully everyone who has answered what level they were, they probably didn't know, or but at least now. Looking for CUI to be level 2, and for level 3 we need to put that on there because there's so few. But there are a couple other questions, like what should be your first step in your CMMC journey, and we're kind of leading you down this path, but you can see how identifying CUI is important, defining your security boundary is important as well. But to Michael's point, engaging with a company like Michael's to start with, and they can maybe point us point in our direction, or someone like us. But getting a professional involved is probably certainly the way to go. I mean, wouldn't you agree with that, Brad? I mean, from your years of experience helping folks through these sort of things, earlier is probably better.
Yeah, and this is probably geared mostly towards level 2. Like if you have CUI in your system, obviously, but just given with what Michael said earlier, there's only limited C3PAOs out there, and organizations that are tied to those like ours, where we have Michael's ear and we can call him in to help us scope and make sure that on the front end of the engagement of getting them going, we're going to do this thing the right way. We'll lay it out very logically, and it should make for a very smooth ride all the way through to completion. So absolutely. I mean, I think engaging now, or having the discussions now and getting that ball rolling is always better. Again, back to you don't want to get to a point where, hey, we have to have this and we should have had it a long time ago and we need to be there in 3 months. That's going to be very, very difficult for anybody to do, just given the limited bandwidth of cybersecurity auditors out there and C3PAOs. So
perfect. And I think this next one's going to be a good question for Michael. It's true or false, but you have to meet all requirements to your level to become CMMC certified. And Michael, as you were helping us come up with these answers, you kind of gave us both answers, right? True and false. You can kind of explain the nuance between those two.
Sure. So until the rule comes out, there's only what's called the Joint Surveillance Voluntary Assessment Program, where a C3PAO and DIPCAC will conduct these assessments. During those assessments, you're allowed to have any number of POAMs. And then you agree with the assessment team and DIPCAC what it would take to remediate those. And any item can be a POAM. In the assessment guides from DoD and from Cyber AB, you've heard that they're scored 1, 3, or 5 points for each. And a 5 cannot be POAM'd. So going forward, when the rule comes out, that's when it comes into true, right? So all requirements have to be in place. You're not allowed to have a POAM for a 5 or a 3. So it's the time frame. If you're able to get into the Joint Surveillance Program now, you can have as many POAMs as you want. So you don't really have to meet them all, loosely, I should say. Ultimately, you have to. It's true. Once the final rule comes out, it's all or nothing. So far, again, the rule could come out and change that. But as of right now, you have to meet all the requirements once the rule is in. So joint surveillance, if you can get ready before the rule comes out and get on the schedule, I will tell you, so it's slightly easier.
Makes complete sense. And so one of the acronyms we should have had on the board was POAM. Can you tell us what a POAM is, just so people understand what that means in case they don't know?
So that comes from the federal side of things. It's the plan of actions and milestones. So it's generally some weakness that you have to have a plan and steps to get through, right? So I have to update my software. First step, I got to buy software. So it's a plan to track how you're going to resolve a weakness. So it helps you to guide, hey, I have this weakness. This is who I have to assign to it. Do I have the money? Here's the money resources, how long it's going to take. So it kind of gives you a standard approach to remediating weaknesses that have been identified.
No, completely fair. And then, Brad, I know that last question is actually supposed to be about the SSP. That's not the right question, but in general sense, you've mentioned SSP a couple times throughout the our presentation here. Maybe end on a final note of like kind of what kind of effort that is, and why that's important.
To engage or to get through this whole thing?
Well, no, just the SSP in general. Like, I think that's like just kind of that, we have the wrong question there, but I think the SSP, like, why is that an important thing to consider, and like why is that's a it can be a pretty robust effort in itself.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's not just the SSP. If you think of this, I'll go back to the steps here, really, of defining where all your data is. That's a big step. Defining all the systems that hold that data or process that data, and then are really tasked with governing the security around it. So it's the SIM, it's all the different things that need to be part of the assessment. So when you start going through those requirements, we know, hey, this requirement applies to all of the devices that are in this entire scope. And we've got to go look at all those things and test them. And then we've got to document in the SSP how the requirement applies to all systems, and then what you do to address that requirement. So it can be generally, half page to a page long per requirement, somewhere in there. See them larger and smaller, but it has to be very succinct and documented very well. And then on top of that, you need to have policies and procedures around each requirement, how it's actually, executed within the organization and governed, if you will. So there's a lot of different steps and documentation that go into the whole process, and you don't, like I alluded to, 110 of these things with multiple elements that you've got to think about within a few of them. It's a level of effort to get through for any organization, even one that's got other certifications and other compliance standards achieved.
Perfect, Brad. Well, we're about to sign off, folks, and be on the lookout for emails from us, from our team to you, and we'll be asking for some feedback. And if you'd like to get the recording, please let us know. That feedback is super valuable. And then we look forward to seeing you next month. So be looking out for the advertisements for the next webinar. So again, appreciate your support. Thanks for spending an hour with us today, and we look forward to being in touch. Take care now.
Yeah, thank you.